Welcome to today's Iris session, brought to you by BrightRock, provider of the first ever needs-matched life insurance that changes as your life changes. I'm David O'Sullivan, and today we're going to talk about things couples need to talk about before tying the knot. There's nothing wrong with being head over heels when it comes to tying the knot, but big days can turn out to be big mistakes if you don't make sure you and your partner are completely on the same page before tying the knot. There are many things to consider, from legal matters to career matters and family planning matters. We'll unpack some of these issues today with relatively newlywed entrepreneur Kirsty Bisset, clinical psychologist Dorianne Weil, also known as Dr. D, and attorney Aleisha Oliver. Welcome to all three of you, and thank you very much for your time. I'm going to start with you, Kirsty. There are so many titles that we did have for you, blogger and tweeter and model and all things, but entrepreneur and newlywed, I suppose, is appropriate for this. You've written a very interesting article on the for BrightRock on the Change Exchange. Some people might think it was a bit cynical, but I thought it was more realistic. You said you planned for divorce before you got married. Explain that to me.
100%. So yeah, a couple of people did come back to me and say that it was a bit of a cynical article, but I thought it was a very practical approach to going into marriage. The thing is, when you're planning to get married, you know, being engaged is such an exciting time that you sometimes lose focus on looking after yourself and protecting yourself and your assets.
Yes.
The fact is that marriage, without all of the fluffy stuff, is a transaction. It's a binding agreement to spend the rest of your life with somebody at that moment in your life. But the fact is that people change. You know, who you were 10 years ago is nowhere near the person you are today. And, you know, you're committing to spend the rest of your life with someone at a point in time. But you need to know that people are going to change, and that's a very good thing. But a lot of couples throughout that change will grow apart and not grow together, and then not be prepared emotionally, financially, legally for the repercussions of divorce.
I love the way you stripped out all the emotion of a marriage and called it a binding contract, because Aleisha, I suppose from your perspective, that's what it is, isn't it?
Yes, well, that as well as the life commitment that you make to your partner, but in essence, there's different ways you can get married, and it's very important for couples to be aware of any marital regime that's applicable and that they want to actually enter into. So, for example, we have the marriage in community of property, we have the marriages out of community of property, of which there's two separate types of marriages out of community of property. First one is with accrual, and the other one is without accrual.
Yes. Now, it seems to me there's one that works perfectly. And I'm going to get you to unpack all of those. Tell me the advantages and disadvantages of the others, but it just seems an anti-nuptial contract for me is an absolute essential part of it. But we'll get to all of that. And Dr. D, please put the fluff back into marriage now, because you're not going to see it as a contract between two people. You're going to give me the emotional stuff.
Well, you know, here we already started about being practical and looking at hopefully not the end being divorce at all. But I mean, even if you think about that, there is the emotional divorce, there is the economic divorce, and there is the legal divorce. Those three elements have to come into marriage at all. The problem, Dave, if you talk about putting the fluff in it, sometimes the fluff is very, very much in it. And so, you know, really, you've known me for a long time. I am a romantic,
yes,
but I actually do not believe that you can fall in love. Now, how's that? You actually fall in lust and you grow in love, because what happens when you meet someone, you don't know them at all, and you have all kinds of fantasies, and the fantasies that you have are almost always positive, and together with that there are all kinds of chemicals that are streaming through your body, so you're actually high on drugs with a stranger, and you make decisions that are going to really last the rest of your life, very often without even knowing anything about the person. Sometimes your dreams, hopes, your expectations are met, but very, very often without the kind of conversations or explorations that we're talking about. And actually, it's not about being exactly on the same page. It's about knowing, you know, we have the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But in marriage, there's the platinum rule. And it's do unto others as they would have you do unto them. Because what you might have them do unto you could be entirely different. And then that fit that we're talking about, that you spoke about, keeping the fit through time and space, almost like two pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that initially fit together because there's complementarity of needs. What I'm needing at that point, you providing me at that point. But once those needs are met, then you grow and change. And the challenge is what skills can you develop? How do healthy couples do things differently and communicate with each other such that that fit is maintained all the time? So you might have a different page, but you might need to know what the different page is, agree on how to negotiate those kind of differences, that not everything is going to be exactly the same, that there will be some closeness but not intrusion, space but not distance, room for individuality. All of these things are challenges that you can talk about in the beginning.
Do people confront those challenges and talk about those things?
Sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. They're on a high. They're so excited about getting married. No, they don't want to actually do what you've been speaking about, is confront the reality that it may be, I've got to look after assets, what are the particular challenges. Perhaps they know about them intellectually, and they might say, okay, so, what do you think about having children, or should we have shared bank accounts? And have conversations like that are perhaps a little bit too superficial and not in depth enough. Because of what you've said, it seems like it's taking the fluff and the romance out of it. Leave us alone. We're galloping off into the sunset now, and you want to talk about the possibility of divorce. We'll deal with it when the time comes.
But Dori, I like your perspective. And you will be accused of being cynical and not being romantic enough, but this idea of actually being in lust and then later falling in love, it helps me explain why so many people, at a time when they got married, they say, we are so in love, and 5 years later they go, I don't know who I married. And your analysis really does explain it. In those 5 years, they actually then started understanding who each other was.
Go into it with some hopes and an open mind. So you look for what your priority needs are. You want security, which is quite important. You want friendship. You want continuity, some shared interest, kindness, concern for the other person, respect. Now, how do you know whether those things are going to be center stage and important to the other person right in the very beginning, when the sexual part of it, it's passionate, it's hot, whereas love can be, most certainly, from time to time, but it's more transcendent, it's warm. It's not the icing on the cake, it's the nourishing fruit cake underneath that is long-lasting and sustainable. Getting to the icing, I don't want to say that all of that's got to go the minute you tie the knot, not at all. But you're also going to have to deal with the dogs have got worms and who's taking the children at school, and to school. And how do you maintain the excitement and romance? And that doesn't happen automatically. Sometimes you sit with people and say, you know what, you're so caught up in your work or in other things that where life happens. Your children have become a priority, but what about the statement that the best thing you could ever do for your children is love your spouse? If your marriage is a priority, do you have time in your diary where it says every Thursday night is our time together because that's how you value it? Are we, at the beginning, you think that these things just happen automatically. And as you go through it, you can have just a deep, warm, transcendent, connected, wonderful relationship full of romance also. But I think that some of it is quite hard work, and people don't like the idea. They just think you fall in love and it should be easy. Work is what you do in the office.
Yes, that's right.
It's not what you do at home.
Aleisha, you're nodding away there now. Is this your lawyer's hat on your head, or is this your, your human hat on your head?
It's both. It's both my personal experience and my experience as an attorney, where people have gone in thinking, oh, this is going to be an amazing experience, and then they have no idea what's going on. then all the mud hits the wall, it's slinging, it's disastrous off the end of it.
When a couple come to you and they're about to get married and they need to start talking about antenuptial contracts, prenups, things like that, do you ask them the kinds of questions Dr. D is raising here? Do you ask them, have you actually explored one another's relationship? Do you know what you're getting into here?
Well, I generally, if I'm comfortable and if the client is comfortable with me, I will ask those questions. But they've come to me asking me to advise them on what best to enter into when they decide what marital regime they want to adhere to. Again, it all depends on trust. If you don't trust your partner, then most of the time, and this is my own experience, we have people who say, well, actually, I'd like to keep my stuff mine and keep your stuff yours. And it also happens with businesswomen and businessmen who are involved in high-profile business activities or previously been married, and there's trusts involved, where it's ANC without accrual, and that is out of community without accrual. So generally, it's a trust issue in my personal experience.
So from that, it's very hard when somebody comes to a lawyer with a brief to open up all the other things, as you have the most definite brief. I think an interesting question, or it could be, gee, we could find a new opportunity here. I think it's interesting to be able to find very subtle, non-challenging ways to be able to open up these things. So you would find that either there's some lack of trust, or what you're talking about, or they coming into a relationship with ideas about men and women and roles and so on that they've seen in their own parental relationship, where they either want to replicate it, so the man pays for everything or whatever it is. That's what men and women do. Or they might say, I'll never want to be like my mother was, and have no independence and need to ask for everything that I want. And that's what's motivating me. I want to do it differently. So an interesting question could be, what do you think? How do you think it should work, maybe financially, between men and women? And that doesn't need to mean that there's lack of trust. What it could mean is, where do some of your ideas come from? Would be interesting for your partner to know, and see whether you agree, or whether you can agree to disagree.
That's right.
So.
Kirsty, for you, did you have these kinds of conversations with your spouse? Barry, is it?
Barry, yes. So for us, we started having these conversations long before we got engaged even. And I think that's important, because I think once you're engaged, you're kind of, more than halfway there to spending the rest of your life with someone. So these conversations need to happen long in advance. And you need to learn how your partner deals with very difficult situations. For us, we were together for 4.5 years before we got engaged, before we got married, and went through a heck of a lot, losing businesses, losing friendships, moving cities, owning a cat.
Owning a cat being quite high on the list of those traumas.
So, these conversations need to happen over months, years even, before you actually sit down with a lawyer and sign on the dotted line.
Do you find...
You had the luxury, and I think that it was such an advantage of being together for that amount of time and having life experiences that would precipitate and engender those kind of conversations.
I think it's so important.
So, you had the experience. It sounds like, I don't know if you were living together, but who feeds the cat? Let me look at how this person deals with a live animal. You can get a lot about it. So the falling in lust as opposed love, very often people don't, the lust is so strong that they believe it to be love, and they don't check out these things over the period of time and have the opportunity and use the opportunities in the way that you were able to.
Certainly. So did you find in those years that you were together, and you compare that time with now, have you fundamentally changed as people? Has your relationship changed fundamentally?
100%. When we met, I was a postgrad student. He was a business owner. I lived in Joburg. He lived in Durban. We did long distance for 2 years. 6 years ago, we were completely different people to who we are now. And like I said in the beginning, we've changed a heck of a lot. But through that change, we've just pulled together. And that's how we knew for a very long time that we want to spend the rest of our lives together. And we know that we're not going to be the same people we are today in 10 years' time, and that's great. And we're excited for it, but we know that we're able to deal with all of those challenges that life can throw at us.
And you know that the changes are going to be such that you will remain a couple. They're not going to be so fundamental that you are going to have to move apart.
Well, I mean,
I suppose that's asking you to look into a crystal ball, which I don't want you to do.
in the article I wrote, I did write about the extreme situation. So Baz and I spoke about if he was in a car accident and he sustained a very bad head injury that turned him into an abusive jerk, and it couldn't be treated. In that case, yes, we will get divorced. I wouldn't want to stay in it. He wouldn't want me to stay in it. So, I mean, in extreme cases like that, then yes, we would make the decision to part ways.
But you're talking about such a fundamental change to a person's personality.
That's very extreme. But
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, we've been through a heck of a lot before, and we kind of feel like we can weather any storm.
Dori?
You know what's really exciting with this is that probably, I don't know if it came out in your article, but it's certainly the next article. What I'd be so interested in, and you telling us, is the how. You see, because you have done the what, you've managed to stay together over times where you absolutely see that there are real changes, and the skills that you use. Even inadvertently, I can tell you if you've done that up to now, you're communicating well. So you're not acting on assumptions, you're checking out that what you believe to be the case is the case with him. So it's really, one of the things is good communication. Another one is respect for people's boundaries. So you go in that relationship, I'm sorry, I'm making assumptions that might not be right. So you can say, you know, if you're right or wrong, but it sounds like there's respect for individuality. So there's a part of you that's together as a couple that you share, but you've got your own careers that are celebrated by the other person as well. You know, and sharing of emotion is another thing that couples who stay together, you know, they are able to say that upset me, or I'm really excited about it. Things like task negotiation, working out who does what. Yeah. So it's not hit and miss, oh, we'll just stay together over the time. People don't often say, well, let's just do task negotiation, or let's talk about, and they often wait until there's a big issue where they say, right, you have to sit down and talk. And I mean, often to him it's like worse than root canal treatment, you know. But to maintain that fit, even though there've been such fundamental changes, you've been doing things. And the other thing that you've said as well, which was so interesting, is, you know what, throughout all of this, even though there's such a deep connection and a friendship and a companionship and communication and so on, I still know that I have to maintain my dignity. So no, I will decide how I will and will not be treated. And if he turns into an abusive jerk, that's a deal breaker.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Aleisha, I think would you like Dr. D to be there when people come and say, I need a prenup, I need an antenatal?
Oh, I need her there with me.
Yes.
Oh yes, very much so. You know, it's very scary when a lot of what you've actually touched on right now is pretty much 90% of the divorce cases that I get. Pretty much a case of, well, we can't communicate with one another anymore. I don't trust him. He doesn't help me with housework, or she doesn't help me pay the bills, or whatever the case is. There's no respect for each person's own authority. You know, when you come from a legal system where matrimonial power vested in the husband, yes. But now we're dealing with a situation where most women are actually working people. You know, you can't just, you know, stand there and expect your wife to do certain things, or vice versa. You can't expect your husband to do certain things. There must be equal communication, equal respect. I just wish that well, obviously that would put me out of business, but I'm okay with that. That's what I'm trying to say. I'm okay with that. I believe in the sanctity of marriage. And it's very sad when I have to assist people with their divorces and I learn about these things, and I think to myself, you've been married for over 20 years. And all of a sudden, you deal with all your issues, and then when it comes to divorce, let's just throw everything out there.
When I was doing the reading ahead of this session, I saw a common theme was that marriages tend to break down because of issues of money. finance. And one of the critical questions, and I've written a few of them down, Dorianne, I'm going to be asking you about these, but one of them was, what's your relationship with money? To what extent do you find when couples are coming to you and saying, this isn't working, you are able to say money is at the root of this?
Again, between 80 to 90% of the time. And the reason is, again, it could be multiple issues. It could be that, as I said, there's no perceived equal contribution in the household. It could also be that there was, I don't know how to put this in another way, but the drafting of that antenuptial contract has been in such a way that either neither of the parties understand what's going on in their ANC, or it wasn't what they intended when they signed the ANC.
Okay, you're going to explain the different regimes. You went through processes, Kirsty, where you were losing businesses. Money was an issue there, and you saw your way through it. How difficult was that?
Money is always a huge issue between two people. You know, thankfully we had money saved up, so you know we weren't on the bones of our butts at that stage. But we've kept the conversation about money very open. We don't have shared bank accounts, but we have access to each other's bank accounts. And you know, even if it's a case of sitting on a monthly basis, opening a bottle of wine, and you know, drawing up an Excel spreadsheet on, okay, this is what's coming in this month, this is what's going out, this is what we have left over, and just agreeing on it. You know, both of you just need to meet each other halfway, even if one person's covering 100% of the costs. You both just need to be comfortable and happy. And if you're not, say something, because like we've said, it bubbles under for so long, and then all of a sudden you have that one situation that just makes someone crack. And it, you know, turns into a huge issue.
Are you able to do the spreadsheet over in an evening?
We
a
don't
romantic
do it on a
day in the
monthly
Bisset
basis.
household.
It's so romantic. We don't do it on a monthly basis, but about quarterly, you know, we'll relook at things.
But the fact is, you can have this honest conversation. Dori?
I think that that's the most important thing that you've said. You see, it's about the honest conversation that they can have about it. I mean, you say that it really is about money, but they're sitting down and they're talking about how are we going to do this. The money becomes a kind of scapegoat. It's a big issue. But the thing is that if you look at a stage, you know, like the people that you're dealing with, there's secrecy. There's not open and honest communication. There's, this is mine, this is yours. So it's seemingly about the money, but it really is about mine and yours and his and hers and power struggles and communication, which has gone by the thing. The money is the issue. And because it is such a big issue, it becomes the natural scapegoat. But they don't know how to talk. Their mindset isn't one of communication and sharing. Their mindset is, you know, me and you, not us. Yeah. And so whatever you approach, and money being one of the most important thing, it's to do with, that can become the scapegoat, and money is a really, really big one. In the way you're talking, it's we have a problem, we have a challenge, let's talk about it together. So you have communication that is clear, communication that is direct, and from listening to you, there's room for feedback. Whereas there's what do you think? Whereas money seemingly is the issue, but we don't know how to communicate anymore. We're involved in a power struggle, and it seems like it's over money. But if you look at other aspects of relationship, you'll see the same dynamic pretty much all over.
Aleisha, let's talk about these anti-nuptial agreements. Is there a regime that you prefer to advise clients on, or really does it depend on their own individual needs?
It always depends on their own individual needs. For example, if a person, as I said, if you've been involved in multiple marriages, or there's issues relating to trusts or businesses or whatever, a lot of the clients that after I explain to them the benefits and the risks of both regimes in respect of out-of-community property, a lot of them select the without accrual. But
explain to us what that means.
Now, the without accrual is very simply put, what's mine is mine and what's yours is yours. There's no shared anything in their marriage. But when they get married, they have the intention, for example, I will get married out of community of property without the accrual, but we'll buy a house together in both of our names. And then that's a shared asset. But that is obviously not in terms of the marital regime. It's a separate joint ownership of a property. Whereas the with accrual, as I recommend for very young couples, couples who don't have an asset base, who are not in love per se. Everyone should be in love,
Yes.
but who haven't developed themselves or are still in the achievement or establishment phase of their careers. And then they start to build together. There's also the building of trust together. They all, I mean, one will benefit the other in terms of skills. They build it together. It's not a joint estate. It's very important to understand it's not a joint estate. The accrual only comes into the question, though, either when one of the spouses passes on, or if there's or if they decide to get divorced.
Right.
Okay, so in essence, it means my estate is this much when we get married. My estate is this much when we get married. My estate has grown this much, and my husband's estate has grown this much. The difference between his growth and my growth is what he would be entitled to. Half of that growth he would be entitled to. That's how it works. Because it works on the assumption that both spouses work together to grow the estate.
Do you have to get involved in these legalities?
You know,
at all,
sometimes
Dorianne?
you do, because I think that you would say, you know, that people find these conversations quite difficult because they step into a legal environment where one of the questions is, what if? What if you separate? And they say, but what are you talking about? You know, we're galloping off into the sunset that is kind of going to last forever. And you talking to us about what if. We don't even really want to imagine that or to think about that. And so I think it's quite a skill for you and for people who deal with that to be able to say, you know, we just really look to protect you and to look at we're not saying that this is going to happen. You need to sort of reassure them. So I think that it's quite a challenging kind of thing, and just to say and have them feel comfortable as much as possible during those kind of conversations. We're not saying that this is going to happen. You know, it's how to have a courageous conversation, and this might be the first courageous conversation that you have to face up to certain realities and not deny certain realities, not to say that this is going to happen, but also be able to have mutual respect and to say what would suit you and what would you. That's often the first time that you see it, this kind of mutual respect. Who is subservient, who isn't? Do they have an egalitarian relationship? Are they able to be honest and open in those kind of challenging conversations?
But if people haven't been open and honest and haven't explored those issues, and they've gone and signed an antenuptial contract, they don't understand their antenuptial contract. They've just gone bowling into it and thought, we need something, let's sign this. How often do you find, Aleisha, when people are now wanting to get divorced, and you get the ANC out and you go, right, let's have a look at the terms, what's actually written here, and that's the first time they've understood the ramifications?
It happens more often than I wish would actually take place. I mean, generally you assume that the attorney would sit them down and would say, this is what you are asking me to do, and let me explain what the repercussions are of what you're asking. And then when they sign on the dotted line and they've declared their values, etc., what they want to exclude, what they're, etc., then they should walk away saying, right, I'm happy, I'm okay. They come to me to ask for a divorce, and then it's like, I didn't understand this ANC, or that's not his correct commencement value. And so what happens is we end up fighting. Firstly, there's always a fight on the kids. About 80% of the time there's a fight on the children. Then there's a fight on whether or not X is entitled to money in terms of the accrual, or Y is. And even over and above that, is this ANC valid?
Is it valid?
Is it valid?
They question the validity.
They question the validity.
If they don't like the contract.
Correct. So it becomes a case of, well, either I didn't have the intention to sign the ANC, or whatever's included in the ANC doesn't make sense. So that could sometimes be attributed to poor drafting, or it could be that I didn't clearly state my intentions to the attorney who drafted it. And then that on its own causes what we call a trial within a trial. And it delays the divorce forever, and then becomes more costly than really it should be.
So really a lot of attention has to be focused on understanding the ANC and what's and it's not like it's a pro forma document. Sign this. It's malleable, isn't it? You work out the terms and conditions
Yes.
within those legal parameters.
Yes, you can include anything that is within the law. Obviously, you can't contract outside of the law. I mean, you can include what that person, if you're going to get into an anti-nuptial contract without accrual, you can say, either at divorce or on my passing, I will donate a certain amount to you. That's a donation. Then you can determine how, I mean, for example, any inheritance that you receive is excluded. That's by law. You put that in there, unless you specifically state otherwise.
Yes.
You say there that my commencement value as at the date of my divorce is X. Generally, attorneys require them to prove that this is the commencement value, and it should do that, because otherwise this can come into the question, and the attorneys then come to court and have to say, I didn't check that commencement value. But generally, your ANC can be, as you say, as malleable as possible within the confines of the law.
Yeah.
So it should be a document that should create the least amount of confusion.
Yeah, it's got to be as clear. So you've got to put a lot of work into it.
How often, because I think it's such an important question, you know, the whole thing is that it's a very emotional time when people are getting married. It's really an exciting time. This is the part that sometimes they don't want to be burdened with, because it actually begs the question, what if you have to separate? And here they are galloping off into the sunset to have their whole life together, you know, and it's hard for them to consider that. So when the attorneys are doing that, you know, can they, I mean, is there a way, do you think, that you ensure, or that other people ensure their understanding? What do you really understand about this? What do you ask? What questions would you want to ask about it? Maybe even, I don't know if it would be sort of too tough to ask for some sort of signature to say that I have understood the terms and conditions of it.
Okay, well, there's three very important things that you've raised there, and I'm going to address all three, because generally, and I get reprimanded for this, my consultations with regards to ANCs are longer than they should be, because I want to make sure that my clients, both husband and wife, prospective spouses, walk out of this room understanding everything that they should understand about that ANC. First question that they don't consider is what happens if, for example. And how I like to explain is I draw pictures, and I'll say to them, say for example this happens, and then you've got this, and then or this happens and there's this. So I draw pictures, and often they think, oh, okay, now I understand. I do sometimes make them sign an indemnity after the long consultation to say I understand what you've explained to me, but I don't make it so that they can't come back to me and say, I have a question.
Yes, okay.
I will always, my door's always open when it comes to questions, because I want them to be happy. And I always say to them, don't sign it now. Okay, think about it. Speak to me if you wish, go and get a second opinion. But this is pretty much what I'm advising you.
It's making me think again about my own ANC. It was 15 years ago, and I'm thinking, what went into it? I do recall, though, we did have honest conversations with each other and with the lawyers. I had practiced a bit of law, so I understood the detail. Kirsty, for you, was it did you invest time and effort into your ANC?
Definitely. That ANC conversation was one of the healthiest conversations for our relationship, undoubtedly, because it's not just a legal thing that you're going through. It's also, you're looking into the future and going, okay, well, what happens if we want to buy a house? What happens if we want to have children? Then what happens? What happens with our businesses if you know, and do we want to split it? It opens up so many other conversations. So don't think that it's this, you know, marriage death threat.
Yes,
it's not
exactly.
that at all. It's actually a really healthy and happy conversation that you can have with your partner.
I think
Anticipating a lovely journey as
that's
well.
it.
Actually, can I comment on that? Because it's very important. One of the benefits, and this is what some people tend to not to see when they get married and they think, oh, ANC, hang on, you don't trust me, is that it protects you in the case of insolvency as well. Exactly. Both of you. You don't want your spouse to be affected if something were to happen to you. But generally, when you enter into an ANC, it protects you in the case of insolvency.
That's right.
So it works as a benefit through and through.
We're presuming marriage here the whole time. What if people just want to live together? They don't actually want to go the full hog and get married. They might not, for whatever reason, believe in the institution of marriage. But should they get them sign some kind of an agreement at that stage? We're just going to live together.
You can. It's called a cohabitation agreement. They can do that. It's again, you can be but you can be more flexible with it. You don't have to register the agreement. It's simply just an agreement between two spouses, so to speak, and it regulates what's to happen in the relationship, what's to happen at dissolution of the relationship. But for all intents and purposes, that cohabitation agreement creates a universal partnership.
Yes.
That's what it is.
But what you say, which I think is what you also say, which is a lot of the benefit of these kind of things is in the discussion. Yeah. It's actually, I mean, you talk about an agreement like that. What it means is that we have to sit down and talk about what we hope for, what our dreams and hopes and intentions are. You know, it has to open up things that where they have to communicate with each other. It's not just a standard agreement that most people agree with and sign. It's in the journey and in the process of discussion, as you were talking. It sounds like you had a good connection and a warm kind of connection, sort of underscored by respect, when you were having the discussion about what the document should look like at the end.
Yeah, no, it's very important. It's just, we've heard it 1,000 times, you know, keep the communication open, and people will drum it into your head for so long, but it really is, it really boils down to that.
We've spoken a lot about money, but you've raised other issues as well, children, and I think that's also a very important conversation to have. I made a list of things, and one, it amused me initially, and then I realized that it could actually be quite serious. The question was, how close are you to your parents? Now, you immediately understand the ramifications of that. Why would that be an important conversation to have ahead of time,
Because
Dori?
there is such a thing as a family life cycle, and there are tasks that have to be undertaken at each stage of the life cycle. And in the beginning, when you start out, you know, you are dependent, of course, and you're dependent on your parents. Then when you become a teenager, you have to separate from your parents to the point that you become independent, where you start. That's why that kind of transition is difficult. You almost have to reject things that they've told you simply because you're in the process of making decisions, your own ones. After that, you know, you go back almost to what you learned, but you've kind of done the journey. You don't have what to prove anymore. When you get married, you know, the thing is you want an interdependent relationship where there's a lot of respect between, with you wanting to hear about their point of view and so on. And that it requires that you have separated emotionally, not that you don't have but an appropriate, a different, independent emotional connection with your parents. And those who haven't done that at the time that they got married are the ones who have the problems with the in-laws in the first couple of years. So each stage of the life cycle has kind of emotional and psychological tasks that ideally need to be addressed and met in order to really be present in the moment and deal with what you have to. So if you really haven't been able to negotiate that, you're going to have in-laws knocking at your door, you know, or you're going to feel that you're caught in the middle between what your mother has told you to do and what you would like to be able to do. How do you stand up to them? You've never done it. So I think these things, and there are all right throughout the family life cycle, there are different transitional tasks that have to be negotiated.
Yeah, Aleisha, do family issues compound problems in a divorce?
Sometimes they do. Generally, what they accuse the other parents of is just dabbling into the matrimonial affairs or getting themselves over-involved. It's not very common, but it does happen, where the perception, and it's all about perception, the perception is your parents aren't helping the situation, or your parents are getting too over-involved, or your parents are usurping my authority in the marriage, or they're usurping my parental authority over the children. Whatever the case is, it happens.
And underneath that is, why are you going along with their opinion more than mine?
Yeah.
Where does your loyalty really lie? Yes. And how come you don't have the strength to stand up to them? And you should be supporting me as the priority person.
One of the other questions I found was a difficult one. It's, what does our shared future look like? Your eyes go very wide there, Kirsty. And when I think about it now, the way I started in my marriage and 15 years later, there is no way I would have been able to imagine that we'd arrive at this situation where my wife is the high-powered executive and I'm the house husband. And loving that role. But 15 years ago, I would have thought, my goodness, I didn't even think of the prospect of having children was going to be
That's
an
what
issue.
we're working towards. Baz wants to be a house husband, so.
And I fully recommend it. But it's amazing how men, they shun it. Society doesn't allow us to do these things.
2016, what?
It is so much fun being the house husband.
You know what underlies that? Sorry, I always seem to be like taking it underneath that. You can't really predict that because I guess, as you say, you know, what you're at and your idea of roles, what husbands should do, what wives should do, idea of roles and idea of authority. But, you know, if underlying that is a way of respecting other person's needs and wants, so then you can talk about, you know, that's what he would like. It's not that what he's come to. That's what he's choosing to. And how would that fit into, you know, where I would like? So underneath that is the value of how do you listen properly with your being fully available in the moment. I mean, those are really communication skills that are wonderful to try and develop. Respect, you know, not projecting onto the other person what you would like, being able to say, you know, I thought that this would suit me, but in fact I'm unhappy. The way that you deal with each other and the way you communicate with each other almost makes some of these things possible that were considered to be very entrenched roles that were unquestionable initially.
Well, I think it's almost time to wrap up, and I just want to recap on some of the issues that we've raised here, and it does seem that the common theme everywhere is this frank and open, honest conversation. I think we agree with that. Yeah. And then the various topics. One that we haven't touched on, Dr. D, and I know that if I raise it, we then have to extend this for another hour, but it's the issue of sex in a relationship. But that also has to be discussed. It's not just part of the fluff and the romance and the lust. It actually does become a bit of a hardcore issue, doesn't it?
Yeah, look, it's not a hardcore issue. I mean, we started the show by saying just make sure that you're on the same page. And then we said, well, it's even better to understand the different page that the person might be on and find ways of respecting those differences. So that comes into sexual relationship as well. But it's not often a problem in the beginning because actually it is dangerous for the soul to be starved of passion, especially in those early years. So you want that to be central, and most of the time people are exactly on the same page when it comes to it. But then what happens is that there are gender differences. You know, women can't use sex as easily as a place to escape to. They kind of, you know, it has to be much more something that they're feeling as a means of expression and connection in the relationship. And maybe that's a bit sexist to say, but I mean, there are differences. We don't have to say better or worse, but there are differences. A way of relaxation and a place to escape to, generally, not always, is easier for women. If you're having an argument with your husband and the way he wants to show you that he's made up is to have a passionate sexual encounter, you'll either close your eyes and think of England or otherwise just say, are you crazy? I'm not up for this now. So there are different things, and those things, you know, as you get to know the person, don't take them as being a rejection. You just understand the differences. And there are different times. A very tough time for women is it for sexual relationships after the birth of a baby. Her libido is actually low. He might take that as now she's focused on the baby and not that interested in me. Actually, there's some biological determinism in it. It's interesting. It's done like that very deliberately so that you can hear the baby cry and not be so distracted and administer to the needs of a child just for a short period of time. So these systems come into it, and as you said, maybe one of the hardest things to talk openly about is sex, because if you reject the sex as a woman, he feels you've rejected him. His sexuality is so tied up with his identity that if you say not tonight, darling, it's not tonight, darling, it's that you don't find me attractive anymore. And it doesn't mean that at all. It could be just for that, that time. So it does require, once again, this kind of word of being fairly courageous and in the how, and in a respectful way, courageous conversation.
And just on a legal practicality, Aleisha, if anybody watching this now suddenly goes, well, my goodness, the antenuptial that I've got does not suit my needs, can that be rectified?
Yes, you can. There's a process you can follow to amend your antenuptial contract. It does have to be by consent. You'd have to notify your creditors, etc., but it can be done. Ideally, we'd prefer not to, because it's an expensive process.
Okay, but it's just for people who've suddenly gone, I've signed the wrong thing, I've got the wrong system, the wrong regime, it can be undone.
Wrong regime or incorrect antenuptial contract?
Well, let's go for incorrect antenuptial contract.
Okay, so yes, incorrect antenuptial contract, absolutely. It's a lot more painless than it is to change your marital regime.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry to conflate the two, but I'm glad you've separated them. Kirsty, Aleisha, Dori, thank you very much. And for those of you who are tying the knot, I hope that you've got some food for thought there, some questions that you need to ask, some conversations that you might have to have with your spouse or your spouse-to-be. That's the end of this particular IRIS session on the Change Exchange. From me, David O'Sullivan, thank you for watching. Look forward to being with you the next time.